Los Angeles was the kind of city that never truly slept, and Lorraine Hayes had long made peace with that. At 61, she had learned to find stillness inside herself even when the world outside refused to offer it. She sat at her kitchen table every morning at 5:30 with a cup of black coffee, watching the pale light crawl across the San Fernando Valley through her window, and she thought about her late husband Gerald, about her grown children scattered across different time zones, about the quiet that had settled into her bones since she stopped fighting what her life had become. Peaceful. Predictable. Hers. She had worked at Pacific Meridian Bank for 22 years, climbing slowly and deliberately from a junior teller to senior branch manager at their Wilshire Boulevard location. She wore her natural silver-streaked hair in a neat bun, dressed in tailored blazers in deep jewel tones, and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made junior staff straighten up when she walked past. She was not intimidating in a loud way. She was intimidating in the way of a woman who had buried a husband, raised 3 children mostly alone after his illness took everything, paid off a mortgage with her own 2 hands, and still showed up every morning with her lipstick on and her back straight. She did not consider herself remarkable. That was perhaps the most remarkable thing about her. It was a Tuesday in late October when everything changed, though Lorraine would not recognize the change immediately. She rarely did. Life had taught her that the moments that rearranged everything rarely announced themselves. They slipped in quietly, dressed as inconvenience or accident or coincidence, and only revealed their full weight later when you were lying in the dark trying to understand how you had ended up somewhere so different from where you started. She had stayed late at the bank that evening. A corporate audit was scheduled for Thursday and she was reviewing the last of the documentation, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten at her elbow. By the time she locked up and stepped into the cool October air, it was nearly 9 o'clock. The Wilshire corridor was still busy with evening traffic, headlights cutting through the marine layer that had rolled in from the coast. Lorraine pulled her blazer tighter and walked toward the parking structure 2 blocks east. She heard him before she saw him. A low sound, barely human, coming from the narrow alley between the parking structure and the dry cleaning business beside it. Lorraine stopped walking. Every sensible instinct she possessed told her to keep moving, to call someone, to not be a 61-year-old woman investigating strange sounds in a Los Angeles alley at 9 in the evening. She stood there for a full 5 seconds listening to those instincts. Then she turned into the alley anyway. He was propped against the brick wall about 15 feet in, half sitting and half collapsed, one hand pressed against his left side. Even in the dim light filtering in from the street she could see the dark stain spreading beneath his fingers. He was dressed in what had clearly been an expensive suit, now ruined. His face was angular and severe even in pain, dark eyes finding her immediately with an alertness that surprised her given how much blood he appeared to be losing. "I'm calling an ambulance," Lorraine said, already reaching for her phone. "No." His voice was low and controlled despite everything. Accented but precise. "No ambulance." Lorraine looked at him for a moment. She looked at the blood. She looked back at him. "Sir, you have a serious wound and you need medical attention." "I know what I need," he said. "And it is not an ambulance." She should have called anyway. She knew that. But there was something in his eyes that was not threatening so much as exhausted, a deep bone-level weariness that she recognized because she had seen it in the mirror at certain points in her own life, and before she fully understood what she was doing she had knelt beside him and was pulling the emergency kit from her purse. She had carried one since Gerald's first cardiac episode 17 years ago. Old habit. "You're lucky I'm not a woman who panics," she said, snapping the kit open with practiced efficiency. He watched her hands move with something close to disbelief. "Who are you?" "Someone who is going to ask you serious questions about this wound after I stop you from bleeding out in this alley," Lorraine said calmly. "Hold still." His name, she would learn later, was Kang Junho. But in that alley in those first minutes he was simply a man in serious trouble who had the sense to stop arguing with her, and Lorraine Hayes had never in her life been able to walk past a person in serious trouble. Gerald used to say it was her greatest strength and her most inconvenient quality in equal measure. Standing in that alley with her good blazer ruined and a stranger's blood on her hands, Lorraine thought Gerald had probably been right on both counts. She worked quickly and quietly, cleaning and packing the wound with the focused calm of a woman who had handled crises large and small for 4 decades. He made no sound throughout, watching her with those dark alert eyes, and when she finally sat back on her heels and told him the bleeding had slowed but he needed stitches, he simply nodded once as though she had confirmed something he already knew. "I have someone who can handle that," he said. "I assumed you did," Lorraine replied, pulling off the latex gloves she kept in the kit and dropping them into the small disposal bag. She looked at him directly. "You're going to tell me what happened?" It was not a question. He seemed to register that. "That is not information I share," he said. "You're bleeding in an alley behind my bank and your wound looks like a knife wound, which means someone put it there intentionally," Lorraine said. "I'm not asking for a police report. I'm asking so I know whether I need to be looking over my shoulder when I leave here." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but the beginning of something adjacent to it. "You are not in any danger," he said carefully. "This has nothing to do with you." "It does now," Lorraine said simply, and began packing up her kit. She helped him to his feet, which required more of her strength than she expected and more willingness to accept help than she suspected he usually offered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the careful deliberateness of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered, even now, even like this. She walked him to the mouth of the alley where a black vehicle with tinted windows materialized almost immediately, as though it had been waiting at a distance. A young man in a dark jacket jumped out and came to his side, eyes cutting to Lorraine with sharp suspicion. Junho said something in Korean. The young man's expression shifted, suspicion replaced by something more careful and neutral. Junho turned to Lorraine. For a moment he simply looked at her in a way that felt oddly thorough, as though he was cataloging something. She walked to her car with her heart beating considerably faster than her face had revealed, and she sat in the parking structure for a full 3 minutes with her hands on the steering wheel before she trusted herself to drive. Then she pulled out into the Los Angeles night and told herself firmly that whatever that had been, it was over now. She was wrong, of course. But she wouldn't know that for another 4 days. Pacific Meridian Bank's Wilshire Boulevard branch opened at 8:30 every weekday morning, and Lorraine was always there by 7:45. She liked the quiet of the bank before the customers arrived, the particular hush of a professional space not yet activated, the smell of fresh coffee from the break room and the soft hum of computers booting up. She greeted her staff by name every morning without exception. She knew that Marcus at the second teller window was saving for his mother's surgery. She knew that Jennifer and Loans had just gotten engaged. She knew that old Mr. Patterson came in every Thursday to deposit his pension check and really just wanted someone to talk to for 15 minutes. These were the textures of her days and she valued them. She had told no one about the alley. There was nothing to tell, she reasoned. She had helped an injured man and gone home. It was done. On Friday morning she arrived to find an arrangement of white roses on her desk so extravagant it was almost architectural, filling the office with a dense clean fragrance that stopped her in the doorway. There was a small card tucked among the stems. She opened it with the particular expression of a woman who already suspected she was not going to find this as simple as she had hoped. Asterisk for your kindness and your composure. K asterisk. Lorraine stood there looking at the roses for a long moment. Then she set down her briefcase, sat in her chair, and picked up her coffee. She was not a woman who was easily unsettled. But she was honest enough with herself to admit that something about that single initial felt like the beginning of something she had not planned for and was not entirely sure she was prepared to navigate. She put the card in her drawer and went to work. He came in person the following Monday. She was in the middle of a meeting with 2 junior managers when Sandra, her assistant, knocked and entered with the expression of someone trying very hard to appear professional while internally combusting. "Ms. Hayes, there's a Mr. Kong here. He says he doesn't have an appointment but asks if you have a moment." Lorraine kept her expression perfectly neutral. "Tell him I'll be with him in 10 minutes. She finished her meeting with complete focus, made 2 notes she needed to make, and then walked out to the lobby where Kang Junho stood by the window in a charcoal suit that fit him with a kind of precision that did not come from off the rack, looking out at Wilshire Boulevard with his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when he heard her and she was struck again, as she had been in the alley, by the quality of his stillness. Most people fidgeted in spaces they didn't control. He simply occupied them. "Mr. Kong," she said, extending her hand with professional warmth. "I see you survived." The corner of his mouth moved. It was barely a smile, but it was something. "Thanks to you." He shook her hand and she noted that his grip was firm but careful, as though calibrated. "I wanted to thank you properly." "The roses were more than enough," Lorraine said. "They were the beginning," he said. "I would like to take you to dinner." Lorraine looked at him steadily. She had 22 years of reading people across a desk and she applied every one of them now. He was composed and direct and there was nothing in his manner that was threatening or presumptuous. There was, however, something very certain about him, the manner of a man who was accustomed to the world arranging itself according to his preferences. She found that she was not particularly intimidated by that certainty. She had built her own world with her own hands and she was comfortable in it. "Mr. Kong," she said. "I appreciate the gesture. But I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted anything in return. You don't owe me dinner." "I know I don't owe it," he said, with that same careful precision. "I want to." "There is a difference." Lorraine held his gaze for a moment. "I don't know anything about you," she said. "That is what dinner is for," he replied. She almost smiled despite herself. "Almost." "I'll think about it," she said, and extended her hand again. "Take care of those stitches." He shook her hand again, held it perhaps 1 second longer than strictly necessary, and left. Sandra appeared at Lorraine's elbow approximately 4 seconds later. "Ms. Hayes," she whispered, "who is that?" "A client," Lorraine said serenely, and went back to her office. She thought about it for exactly 2 days. Then she called the number on the business card he had left with Sandra and said yes. If you are enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Tales. We are working so hard to bring you these stories and we are so close to reaching our goal. Every single subscription means the world to us. And while you're down there in the comments, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We love hearing from you. The restaurant he chose was a private dining room on the 34th floor of a building in Century City, the kind of place that had no sign outside and required a phone call to access and served food that arrived in small perfect portions that somehow managed to be both modest in appearance and extraordinary in taste. Lorraine wore a deep burgundy wrap dress and her good pearl earrings, and when she walked in and saw the room, candlelit, quiet, with Los Angeles spread out below them like a scattered galaxy, she permitted herself exactly 1 moment of being impressed before she composed herself and sat down. Junho stood when she entered. She noted that old-world courtesy from a man she was increasingly certain moved through a world with very few courtesies in it. "You look beautiful," he said, and it was so simply stated, no performance in it, that she felt it differently than she might have expected. "Thank you," she said, and meant it without fuss. They talked for 3 hours. She had expected it to be awkward or stilted, expected to spend the evening navigating around questions she couldn't answer about him and offering carefully edited versions of herself in return. Instead, she found that Junho asked questions with genuine attention and listened to the answers with the focused quality of a man who was genuinely interested rather than merely waiting for his turn to speak. He asked about her work and actually understood her answers. He asked about Los Angeles and she told him about the city she had lived in for 30 years, its contradictions, and its particular beauty, and he listened with the attentiveness of someone learning something they actually wanted to know. She asked him about Korea. About Seoul. About what had brought him to Los Angeles. Business, he said, with a small measured pause before the word that told her the word was technically accurate and comprehensively incomplete. What kind of business? She asked, looking at him directly over her wine glass. He looked at her for a moment with those steady dark eyes. The kind that is better discussed after people know each other better, he said. That's a very careful answer, Lorraine observed. I'm a very careful man, he said. And yet you ended up bleeding in an alley, she said. This time he actually smiled, a real one, brief and almost surprised, as though it had escaped before he could stop it. Even careful men have bad Tuesdays, he said. Lorraine laughed, and something in his expression shifted when she did, softened in a way that she suspected very few people ever saw. She drove home alone at midnight through the glittering Los Angeles dark and sat again in her car in her driveway for a few minutes before going inside. She was not a woman who talked herself out of things she already knew. And she already knew that Kang Junho was not a simple man and that whatever his business was, it was not the kind conducted in offices, and that the intelligent and sensible thing to do was to thank him for a lovely evening and return to her peaceful, predictable life. She also knew that for the first time in 4 years she had sat across from someone and felt genuinely, completely present. Not performing. Not managing. Just there. Gerald had been gone for 4 years. She had not once, in 4 years, felt anything close to what she had felt sitting across from a near stranger in a room above Los Angeles tonight. She got out of the car and went inside and did not talk herself out of anything at all. They saw each other again the following Saturday. Junho texted, precise, unhurried messages that never felt intrusive, and asked if she would show him her Los Angeles. Not the Los Angeles of rooftop bars and celebrity hotspots. Her Los Angeles. Lorraine found the distinction charming enough that she said yes before she finished reading the message. She took him to Leimert Park first, her neighborhood for 20 years before she moved to the valley, walking him through the weekend market where vendors sold shea butter and Kent cloth and hand-painted portraits, and the smell of jerk chicken drifted from a grill at the corner. She watched him take it in with the focused curiosity of a man who traveled constantly but rarely actually arrived anywhere. He stopped at a stall selling handmade leather journals and held one for a long moment, running his thumb across the tooled cover, and the vendor, an older Jamaican man named Winston who had been there every Saturday for 15 years, watched Junho with the particular assessment of a man who had seen everything and could read people the way others read weather. Winston caught Lorraine's eye and gave her a slow approving nod that she pretended not to see. They ate lunch at a Jamaican spot she had been going to for a decade, a small loud cheerful place with plastic tables and food that made Junho go quiet in a way that she was already learning meant he was genuinely moved. He ate oxtail and rice and peas with the careful attention of someone who understood that a meal prepared with love was not a small thing. "This is the best thing I've eaten in Los Angeles," he said. "Better than 34th floor Century City?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Completely different category," he said seriously, and she laughed. He was quieter in her world than he had been in his own. Not uncomfortable, she noted. Just attentive. As though he understood that he was a guest in something she had built over decades and he was taking care not to be careless with it. She appreciated that more than she could easily explain. In the afternoon she drove him to the beach at Playa del Rey, away from the crowds of Santa Monica, where the sand was darker and the water was serious and the wind came off the Pacific with enough force to mean business. They walked along the waterline and he took off his shoes and carried them, which she had not expected, and they walked for almost an hour talking about everything and nothing, her children, his childhood in Busan, the particular loneliness of success, the way grief changed the architecture of a person permanently. My father died when I was 19, he said, looking at the horizon. Before things became what they are. He was a fisherman. He smelled like the sea and motor oil, and he never once in his life asked anything of anyone. He paused. I think about him when I'm near the ocean. Lorraine looked at his profile against the gray Pacific light. What would he think of who you became, she asked, because she was not a woman who softened questions just to be comfortable. He was quiet for a long moment. He would be proud of some of it, he said finally. And he would grieve some of it. Probably in equal measure. That's an honest answer, she said. You ask honest questions, he replied. It would be disrespectful to answer any other way. She stopped walking and looked at him fully, and he turned to meet her gaze, and there was something in the air between them at that moment, the October wind and the gray ocean and the specific quality of late afternoon California light, that made the moment feel heavier and more significant than either of them acknowledged. Then Lorraine started walking again and Junho fell into step beside her and they talked about something else, but the moment had happened and they both knew it. He drove her home in his car, the same black vehicle from the alley, she noticed, though today the young man in the dark jacket was nowhere in evidence, and walked her to her door with the same old-world courtesy he seemed to carry everywhere. He stood on her porch in the fading evening light and looked at her with that thorough steady gaze. Lorraine, he said, and the way he said her name, carefully, as though it meant something, made her press her lips together slightly. Junho, she replied, equally careful. I would like to see you again, he said. And again after that. You're very direct, she said. I find it saves time, he said. And I think you prefer it. She did prefer it. She had spent enough of her life with people who said one thing and meant another to have deep appreciation for a man who simply said what he meant. I'll think about it, she said, which was what she said when she had already decided and needed to maintain the appearance of deliberation. He smiled at that, the small real smile she was already learning to look for. Good night, Lorraine. Good night, she said, and went inside. She stood in her hallway with her back against the closed door and listened to his car pull away, and then she walked to her kitchen and called her eldest daughter Camille in Atlanta. Mama? Camille answered on the second ring, alert immediately because Lorraine did not call on Saturday evenings. Everything okay? Everything is fine, Lorraine said. I met someone. The silence on the other end lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then Camille screamed so loudly that Lorraine had to hold the phone away from her ear, and she stood in her kitchen in Los Angeles laughing in a way she had not laughed in 4 years, and it felt like something loosening in her chest that she had not realized had been wound so tight. What Lorraine did not know in those early weeks, what she had no way of knowing, was that Kang Junho had not simply arrived in Los Angeles on ordinary business. He was the head of the Kang organization, one of the most powerful Korean criminal networks operating on the West Coast, with interests that ranged from import logistics to underground finance to the kind of territorial arrangements that were negotiated not in boardrooms but in back rooms, with implications that could turn dangerous at the speed of a phone call. He had built the organization from the infrastructure his uncle had established in the 90s, expanding it methodically and running it with a discipline that his rivals respected and occasionally feared. He was not a violent man by preference. He was a precise man who understood that violence was sometimes the inevitable cost of the business he was in, and he managed that cost with the same cold clarity he applied to everything else. He had 3 rules that he had kept without exception for 15 years. He did not involve civilians. He did not make personal attachments that could be used as leverage against him. And he did not allow anything into his life that he could not control. Lorraine Hayes was in direct violation of all three, and he had known it from the moment she had knelt beside him in that alley without flinching and told him to hold still. He had investigated her thoroughly before he sent the roses. He knew about Pacific Meridian Bank, about her 22 years there, about Gerald Hayes who had died of heart failure 4 years ago after a long illness, about her 3 children Camille, Derek, and Simone who were scattered between Atlanta, Seattle, and London respectively. He knew she owned her home outright, drove a sensible car, attended church occasionally, and had not been on a date since her husband died. What the investigation had not prepared him for was her. The investigation could tell him facts. It could not tell him the quality of stillness she carried, or the way she asked questions that cut straight to the center of things without malice, or the sound of her laugh which was full and unguarded in a way that nothing else about her publicly was. It could not tell him that sitting across from her over dinner he had felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly calculate, like a person rather than a position. His Lieutenant Park Hyun-soo, who had been with him for 12 years and was the only person in his organization who spoke to him with anything approaching candor, had noted the roses with visible concern. "You sent flowers to a civilian," he said, in the tone of a man choosing his words extremely carefully. "I sent flowers to a woman who saved my life," Junho said, without looking up from the document he was reading. "She's a bank manager," Hyun-soo said. "I'm aware. On Wilshire." "Also aware." Junho. Hyun-soo almost never used his given name. "Your father is in Seoul," Junho said, and the quiet finality in his voice ended the conversation. But Hyun-soo's concern was not unfounded and Junho knew it. Kang Byung-soo, his father, was not a man who involved himself in the daily operations of the organization. He had stepped back 6 years ago and passed formal leadership to Junho, but he maintained visibility into everything that moved in the Kang world, through a network of loyalties and informants that had been built over 40 years. He would know about Lorraine. It was only a matter of when. Junho thought about this in a measured and practical way and then set it aside, which was what he did with problems that had not yet fully arrived. There was no point managing a conflict before it materialized. What he did not allow himself to examine too closely was why, when he set the problem aside, he had no intention whatsoever of also setting aside the woman at the center of it. That was new. That was, if he was honest, slightly alarming. Kang Junho had not in his adult life wanted something that he was also aware he probably should not have. He had always been able to make the rational choice. He had ended a 7-year relationship 6 years ago when it became clear that Seo Young-seo wanted a version of him that he was not going to become, and he had done it cleanly and without looking back. He had chosen the organization over personal comfort at every juncture without exception. But Lorraine Hayes was not a conflict he felt inclined to resolve by walking away from it. And that, more than anything else, told him that something had already changed in him that he had not been paying sufficient attention to. He sat in the black car outside her house on Saturday night and watched her porch light go off after she went inside, and he thought about her voice on the beach saying what would he think of who you became, and he thought about his father on the water at dawn, and he thought about the 15 years he had spent building something that kept him very comfortable and very powerful and almost entirely alone. Then he drove back to Koreatown through the Los Angeles dark and called Hyun-soo and talked about business until midnight, and was professional and precise and in complete control of everything, and did not think about Lorraine Hayes at all. He was lying to himself, of course. But that, too, was something he would understand later. November arrived in Los Angeles the way it always did, with a subtlety that people from other climates found maddening. The light shifted slightly, the evenings cooled enough to require a jacket, the jacaranda trees stood bare and patient. Lorraine had lived here long enough to love the seasons in their California understatement, the way the city marked time quietly rather than dramatically. She and Junho had settled into something that neither of them named. They had dinner twice a week, sometimes at restaurants where he clearly had arrangements that made tables appear and rooms go quiet, sometimes at small neighborhood places she chose where nobody paid them any particular attention. They went to the Getty one Sunday and walked through the galleries talking about paintings with the ease of people who had known each other for years rather than weeks. He had opinions, genuinely considered ones, and he expressed them with the same directness he brought to everything else. He had still not told her what he did. She had still not asked directly, because she already knew enough to know, and she was not yet sure what she intended to do with what she knew. She was a practical woman and she examined things honestly. She liked him. She liked him in a way that was inconvenient and had arrived without her permission and showed no signs of leaving. He was intelligent and measured and surprisingly funny in a dry, understated way that made her feel clever for catching it. He listened to her. He looked at her as though she was worth looking at, which was something she had not felt in a very long time. She also knew he was dangerous. Not to her personally, she believed that instinctively and it had not been contradicted. But dangerous in the way of a man whose world operated by rules entirely different from hers, whose phone calls sometimes required him to step away and return with a neutrality across his face that had not been there before. She was not naive. She had 61 years and good eyes. She was still working out what she thought about all of it when he kissed her for the first time. It was a Wednesday evening and they had eaten dinner at her house, which she had agreed to somewhat against her better judgment, and then spent 2 days cooking for her because she was not a woman who did anything halfway. He had eaten her food with the same reverent attention he had given the oxtail at her Jamaican place and told her it was the best meal he had eaten since his grandmother died, and there was something so unperformative about the way he said it that she had to look away for a moment. They were standing in her kitchen afterward, Lorraine washing the good dishes she didn't put in the dishwasher, Junho drying them with a focus that suggested he found the task genuinely absorbing, and they were talking about nothing important, something about the neighborhood, and then they were not talking and she turned to find him looking at her with an expression that was not hidden at all. That was in fact the most unguarded she had ever seen him, and before she could decide what to do about it he had set down the dish towel and stepped closer and said her name very quietly. Lorraine. I know, she said, which surprised them both. He kissed her the way she might have expected from him, carefully at first, as though making sure, and then with a warmth that was nothing like careful at all, and she kissed him back with 61 years of knowing exactly what she wanted and no inclination whatsoever to pretend otherwise. When they separated he rested his forehead against hers and she could feel him breathing, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. I need to tell you something, he said finally. About what I do. I know what you do, she said quietly. He pulled back enough to look at her. She met his gaze steadily. How long? He asked. Since the alley, she said. A man who won't call an ambulance after a knife wound and has a car appear from nowhere in 30 seconds. I'm a bank manager, Junho. I understand how money moves and where it comes from. I've been doing this long enough to recognize certain patterns. He was quiet for a moment. And yet you're still here. I'm still here, she confirmed. I haven't decided what I think about all of it yet. But I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know just to make things simpler. He looked at her for a long time with that expression she was learning, the one that meant he was recalibrating something. You are the most unusual woman I have ever met, he said. I'm a 61-year-old black woman from Los Angeles who has seen a great deal of life, she said. I imagine I'm a little different from your usual. Completely, he said, and the way he said it was not a complaint. She made them both tea and they sat at her kitchen table, and he told her, in careful measured terms, enough of the truth that she could hold it honestly. He did not tell her everything. She understood that. But he told her enough, and she listened without flinching, and when he was done she wrapped both hands around her mug and thought for a moment. I'm not asking you to change anything, she said finally. I'm not in a position to ask that, and I wouldn't if I were. But I need you to understand that I'm not going to be something you keep in a separate compartment from your real life. I'm too old for that and too tired of it. I understand, he said. I don't think you do yet, she said, not unkindly. But I think you will. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she let him, and they sat in her warm kitchen in the November Los Angeles night, and outside the city hummed along in its endless indifferent way, and inside everything was very quiet and very still and entirely different from how it had been before. If you are loving this story, we need your help. Please subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Tales. We are so close to our monetization goal, and every subscription brings us one step closer to continuing to bring you these stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from right now? We want to hear from you. The call from Seoul came on a Thursday morning in late November. Junho was in his office on the 14th floor of a building in Koreatown that housed, on its upper floors, the legitimate financial and logistics arm of the Kong organization, import consulting, freight coordination, the kind of paperwork-heavy business that gave everything beneath it a respectable face. He was reviewing quarterly figures with Hyun-soo when his personal phone lit up with a number he recognized immediately and had not seen in 6 weeks. He picked it up on the third ring. Father. Kang Byung-soo's voice had not changed in 30 years. It was low and measured and carried the particular weight of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise it to be obeyed. You have been busy, his father said, in Korean. I'm always busy, Junho replied, in the same language, keeping his voice completely neutral. I hear you have been busy with a woman, Byung-soo said. An American woman. A black American woman. Considerably older than appropriate. Junho was quiet for exactly 1 second, cataloging who in his Los Angeles circle had reported to Seoul and making a mental note to address it. You hear many things, he said. I hear everything that concerns the Kong name, his father said, with the patient certainty of a man stating a law of nature. This concerns it considerably. I disagree, Junho said. The silence from Seoul lasted 4 seconds, which from Kang Byung-soo was the equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. You disagree, his father repeated. I do, Junho said, in the same unhurried tone. She is a private matter. Nothing in your life is a private matter, Byung-soo said, and now there was something beneath the measured surface, not anger exactly but the warning register that preceded it. You are the head of this family. Every choice you make carries the family name. A woman like this? A woman like what, exactly? Junho said, and his voice was still quiet but it had changed slightly, a quality entering it that made Hyun-soo across the desk go very still. Byung-soo did not answer immediately. This is not a conversation for the phone, he said finally. I will be in Los Angeles in 2 weeks. I look forward to it, Junho said, which was not true, and ended the call. He set the phone down and looked at the quarterly figures for a moment without seeing them. Then he looked at Hyun-soo, who was studying the middle distance with the focused attention of a man pretending he had heard nothing. Find out who called Seoul, Junho said. Already working on it, Hyun-soo said. Lorraine did not know about the phone call. She was having her own Thursday, which involved a difficult conversation with a longtime client whose business account showed patterns that concerned her, 2 staff meetings, and a lunch she ate at her desk because there was not time for anything else. By 5 o'clock she was tired in the thorough way of a person who had given a full day to other people's problems, and she drove home through the thickening evening traffic thinking about nothing more complicated than a bath and her book. Junho was parked outside her house. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment looking at the black car, and then she got out and walked over to the passenger side and tapped on the window. It slid down. He was sitting in the back seat with his jacket off and his phone in his hand and the expression of a man who had been thinking hard about something for several hours. "You should have called," she said. "I know," he said. "Get in." She raised an eyebrow at the instruction but got in because she was curious and because there was something in his face that was not quite worry but was adjacent to it. The car was warm and smelled faintly of leather and something cedar adjacent that she had come to associate with him. "My father called this morning," he said, without preamble. "He knows about you. He's coming to Los Angeles in 2 weeks." Lorraine absorbed this. "Coming specifically because of me?" she asked. "Partly," he said. "Also organization business. But yes. Partly because of you." "What kind of man is your father?" she asked. Junho considered the question with his usual thoroughness. "Intelligent," he said. "Strategic. He built something significant from very little and he is proud of it and protective of it. He loves me in the way of a man who has always confused love with ownership." He paused. "He will not be welcoming." "I didn't expect him to be," Lorraine said. "He may try to speak to you directly," Junho said. "To discourage you." "He's welcome to try," Lorraine said, pleasantly. Junho looked at her with something in his eyes that was almost amusement but carried a warmer undercurrent. "You're not concerned," he said. "I'm 61 years old," she said. "I've dealt with difficult men my entire professional life. I manage a bank branch on Wilshire Boulevard. I have sat across the desk from men who thought they could intimidate me into approving loans they hadn't earned, and I have smiled at every single one of them and said no with complete composure." She looked at him evenly. "Your father is welcome to make his case. I'll listen respectfully. And then I'll make my own decisions, as I always have." He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Then he reached over and took her hand, turning it palm up in both of his and looking at it as though it contained information. "I wanted to warn you," he said quietly. "I didn't want you to be caught off guard." "I appreciate that," she said, and she meant it. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. "Come inside. I'll make dinner." "You don't have to." "Junho," she said, with the patient firmness she used on junior staff who were about to argue themselves into a corner. "Come inside." He came inside. She made him pepper soup from a recipe her mother had taught her, adjusting it for what she had in the kitchen, and he sat at her counter and watched her cook with an attention that she found simultaneously flattering and slightly unnerving. He had a way of watching her that was not intrusive. He never made her feel observed, but was very complete, as though he was memorizing things he didn't want to forget. "Tell me about Gerald," he said, while she was stirring. She didn't stop stirring. "What do you want to know?" "What he was like. What you were like together." She thought about it. "He was a kind man," she said. "Genuinely kind, not performing it. He was a paramedic for 30 years and he brought that energy home. He noticed when people needed something before they asked for it. He was funny. Terrible jokes, but committed to every single one." She smiled at the pot. "He was my best friend for 32 years. When he got sick I watched him become someone slightly different and I loved that person too. When he died I didn't know what to do with myself for about a year." "How did you come back?" Junho asked. "Work," she said. "My children. My church ladies who would not leave me alone no matter how many times I told them I was fine." She tasted the soup and adjusted the seasoning. "And I decided one day that grief was not going to be the last chapter. Gerald would have been furious with me if I'd let it be." "He sounds like someone worth loving," Junho said. "He was," she said simply. She looked up from the pot. "Have you ever been in love?" He considered this with the honesty she had learned to expect from him. I was close to it once, he said. 6 years ago. But I think what I loved was the idea of a different version of my life more than I loved the actual person. When I understood that, I ended it. That's a hard thing to be honest about, she said. It seemed worse to continue it, he said. Her name? Young SEO, he said, and something in the slight flattening of his voice when he said it gave her a small piece of information she filed away without comment. She served the soup and he ate it with his eyes briefly closed on the first spoonful, which she took as the highest possible compliment, and they ate together at her kitchen table with the ease of people who had been sharing meals for years, and outside the November dark pressed against the windows and inside everything was warm. Junho, she said, when they were almost done. What do you actually want? From this. From us. He set down his spoon and looked at her with full attention. Everything, he said, without hesitation and without performance. The word sat between them for a moment. That's a large answer, she said carefully. It's an honest one, he said. I'm aware of what I'm saying. I'm aware of the complications. I'm aware that my world is not a simple place to ask someone to step into. He held her gaze steadily. But I've spent 15 years being practical about everything and I find I don't want to be practical about this. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, looking at him. She was a woman who examined things clearly and she examined this clearly now, his face, the quality of his stillness, the way he was not trying to be anything other than exactly what he was, complications and all. I find I don't want to be practical about it either, she said finally. Which is saying something, because I am an extremely practical woman. He reached across the table and tucked a loose strand of her silver hair behind her ear with a gentleness so deliberate it made her breath catch, and she let it, and neither of them looked away. The 2 weeks before Byung-su's arrival passed in the specific way of time that is both too fast and too slow simultaneously. Lorraine and Junho saw each other as often as their schedules allowed, which was more often than either of them had perhaps planned. She went to Koreatown with him one evening and he walked her through streets she had driven past for 30 years without truly entering, taking her to a sunduba restaurant he had been going to since he first arrived in Los Angeles 7 years ago, where the owner greeted him with the comfortable familiarity of long acquaintance and brought them food without being asked. She ate soft tofu stew in a stone pot that arrived still boiling and felt the specific pleasure of being introduced to someone's private world. She met Hyunsu formally over that dinner, a quiet focused man in his late 30s who assessed her with eyes that missed nothing and was scrupulously polite throughout. She understood that his opinion mattered to Junho in the way of someone who had been a loyal witness to a long portion of his life, and she was simply herself, which was the only strategy she had ever employed successfully. Afterward, when Junho went to take a call, Hyunsu looked at her across the table with the directness of someone who had decided to spend 1 minute being honest. He has never brought anyone here, he said. Here meaning this restaurant? She asked. Here meaning his actual life, Hyunsu said. You should know that. Thank you for telling me, she said. He nodded once, and when Junho returned the moment closed as cleanly as it had opened, and they finished the evening talking about other things, but Lorraine carried what Hyunsu had said home with her and held it carefully, understanding its weight. She told Camille about the father's imminent visit on their regular Sunday call. Camille, who was a corporate attorney in Atlanta and had the instincts of someone who had spent 15 years in rooms where powerful people negotiated, was quiet for a moment after Lorraine finished. Mama, she said. How serious is this? Serious enough that his father is flying from Seoul, Lorraine said. That's not what I'm asking, Camille said. Lorraine looked out her kitchen window at the November afternoon. It's serious, she said quietly. I didn't plan it. But it is. Another pause. Does he make you happy? He makes me feel like myself, Lorraine said. Which at this point in my life might be the same thing. Camille was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. Tell me everything about him. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Lorraine laughed and settled into her chair, and talked to her daughter for an hour, and the afternoon light moved across her kitchen floor, and she thought that Gerald would have found the whole situation enormously amusing and also would have approved of a man who watched her cook with that quality of attention, and the thought made her both sad and glad in the particular way that grief eventually teaches you, where love and loss stop being opposites and become simply two aspects of the same permanent thing. Kong Byung-soo arrived on a Tuesday. Lorraine did not know the exact moment of his arrival. She found out later that he had flown into LAX on a private flight, been collected by 3 vehicles, and taken to a property in San Marino that the Kong organization maintained for senior family visits. She was at work when he landed, reviewing a loan application with the focused professionalism of a woman whose personal life and professional life had 22 years of practice staying in their respective lanes. Junho texted her at noon. He is here. I will see him this evening. I'll call you after. She texted back, okay. I'll be fine. Focus on your evening. He sent a single response, Lorraine. She smiled at her phone and put it face down on her desk and went back to the loan application. He called at 10:30 that night. She was reading in bed, the lamp on, her glasses perched on her nose, and she picked up on the second ring. How was it? She asked. Expected, he said. His voice was composed but carried a flatness that she had learned to read as controlled tension. He was formal. Polite on the surface. He made his position clear without raising his voice. And his position is? That you are unsuitable, Junho said, with a neutrality that told her exactly how unsuitable his father considered her. Your age. Your background. He used the word circumstances. He said the Kong family has a position to maintain and this relationship undermines it. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Outside her window a car passed on the street below. And what did you say? She asked. I said that I heard him, Junho said. And that I intended to continue seeing you. How did he respond to that? He said he expected I would come to my senses, Junho said. And then we talked about organization business for 2 hours as though the first conversation had not happened. That's a particular kind of family dynamic, Lorraine observed. Yes, he said dryly. It is. She was quiet for a moment, turning a page of her book without reading it. Junho. I need you to understand something. Tell me. I am not going to be the reason you destroy your relationship with your father, she said. I've lived long enough to know that family ruptures rarely heal cleanly and the cost is usually paid for decades. I need you to think about what you actually want to spend that cost on. I know what I want to spend it on, he said, without hesitation. You say that now, she said, gently but honestly. Lorraine, he said, and his voice had shifted, the flatness gone and something warmer and more exposed underneath it. I have spent my entire adult life making calculated decisions. Everything has been weighed and measured and optimized. I am very tired of it. A pause. You are the first thing in 15 years that I have wanted without calculating whether I should. She pressed her lips together for a moment against something that wanted to surface. That's a beautiful thing to say, she said carefully. It is also simply true, he said. She exhaled slowly. Get some sleep, she said. We'll talk more tomorrow. Lorraine. Yes? I'm not changing my mind, he said. I want you to know that. I know, she said softly. Good night, Junho. She put the phone down and took her glasses off and lay in the dark looking at the ceiling of the room she had shared with Gerald for 20 years, And she thought about what it meant to be chosen deliberately and without calculation by a man who calculated everything, and she thought that life was very strange and very generous sometimes in the things it brought you when you had stopped looking for them. She fell asleep with the lamp still on. We are so grateful you are still with us on this journey. If this story is moving your heart, please subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Tales. We are so close to our goal and your subscription costs you nothing but means everything to us. And please, drop a comment, where in the world are you watching from today? We read every single one. Kang Byung-soo requested a meeting with Lorraine on a Thursday morning. The request came through Junho, delivered with the careful neutrality of a man trying to present information without editorializing it. They were having coffee at her kitchen table before work, a habit that had established itself without either of them formally deciding on it, Junho arriving at 7 with coffee from the Korean bakery 3 blocks from his Koreatown apartment that did a dark roast she had become unreasonably attached to. He wants to meet you, Junho said, watching her over his cup. I know, Lorraine said. You expected it. Of course I expected it, she said. A man like your father doesn't make his objections through intermediaries and then leave it at that. He wants to assess me directly. He wants to make his case to my face and gauge how I respond. She sipped her coffee. When and where? Junho was quiet for a moment. You don't have to agree, he said. I know I don't have to, she said. I want to. I'd rather meet this directly than have it sitting in the background. She looked at him. I assume he'll try to offer me money. Something shifted in Junho's expression, a tightening around the eyes. Possibly, he said, with the controlled flatness that meant the possibility made him furious. It's all right, she said calmly. Men like your father operate on the assumption that everyone has a price. He'll learn otherwise. Lorraine. Junho. She set her cup down and looked at him directly. I am a 61-year-old woman who has navigated this world entirely on her own terms for a very long time. I can handle one disapproving Korean father. A pause. Schedule the meeting. He looked at her for a long moment with that expression she had come to know, the one that meant he was feeling something he hadn't yet found the language for. Then he nodded and picked up his phone. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at the San Marino property. Lorraine drove herself. She had declined Junho's offer to send a car with the same pleasant firmness she applied to most things she had already decided, and she pulled up to the property in her sensible silver sedan and sat for a moment looking at the house, a large quietly imposing Spanish colonial on a tree-lined street, the kind of house that communicated wealth through understatement rather than display. She approved of that, architecturally, even under the circumstances. She was wearing her best navy blazer, her good pearls, and the expression she wore when she was about to walk into a meeting that mattered. She had been wearing versions of that expression for 22 years and it had never failed her. A young man met her at the door and led her through a house that was furnished with the careful impersonality of a property maintained for occasional use, through to a rear sitting room where Kang Byung-soo was waiting. He was in his late 70s, silver-haired, slight in the way of a man who had always been lean rather than one diminished by age, with eyes that were sharp and still and assessed her in the first 3 seconds with a thoroughness that reminded her, almost painfully, of his son. He was dressed in a dark suit and he did not stand when she entered, which she noted without expression. Ms. Hayes, he said, in accented but precise English. Please sit. Thank you, she said, and sat with the composed ease of a woman in a meeting she had called herself. Tea was poured by someone who then disappeared. Byung-soo looked at her across the low table with those still sharp eyes and she looked back at him without filling the silence, because she had learned long ago that the person who filled silences first usually lost something in the exchange. You are not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? She asked. Someone more easily explained, he said. Lorraine considered this. I'm not sure I understand the distinction, she said. My son has had interest from women before, Byung-soo said. Women who wanted something from him that I could identify and address. Money. Status. The protection of his name. He paused. You appear to want none of these things. Which makes you more difficult to address. I want your son's company, Lorraine said simply. I find him interesting and I enjoy being with him. I'm 61 years old and I have my own house and my own career and my own life. I'm not looking for rescue. And yet here you are, Byung-soo said, with a measured courtesy that had something cold running beneath it. In a situation that you must understand is not appropriate. Appropriate to whom? Lorraine asked, pleasantly. The slight pause before his answer told her she had caught him off balance, barely, but enough. To the Kong family's position, he said. To our culture. To the expectations that come with my son's responsibilities. He is the head of a significant family. The woman beside him must be. Must be what, Mr. Kong? Lorraine said, still pleasant, still completely level. He looked at her for a moment. Someone who understands our world, he said. Someone who fits within it. I see, Lorraine said. She picked up her tea and held it in both hands, a deliberate gesture of comfort and composure. Mr. Kong, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you're a man who prefers honest conversations even when they're uncomfortable. She met his eyes directly. I understand that I'm not what you imagined for your son. I understand the cultural distance and I'm not dismissing it. These are real things. She paused. But I've spent my entire adult life being told, in various ways, by various people, that I didn't fit within someone else's idea of appropriate. And I've spent my entire adult life proving that my own judgment about my own life was more reliable than their objections. She set the tea down. I'm not saying this to be disrespectful to you. I'm saying it so that you understand who you're actually dealing with. Byung-soo was very still. His expression had not changed, but something in the quality of his attention had shifted. He was listening in a different register now. You are very composed, he said. I've had a great deal of practice, she said. He cares for you, Byung-soo said, and it came out with a flatness that told her this was the thing that truly concerned him, more than culture or status or appropriateness. More than he has cared for anyone in a very long time. This makes you dangerous. Dangerous to what? She asked. To his focus, he said. To his clarity. My son's effectiveness depends on his ability to remain unattached to things that can be used against him. You are an attachment. A significant one. In our world, significant attachments are vulnerabilities. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, looking at him. She understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who had listened carefully to a great many people across a great many years, that beneath the calculated opposition and the cultural objections and the talk of appropriateness, this man was afraid. Not of her specifically. Of losing his son to something he couldn't control. Mr. Kong, she said, with a gentleness she meant sincerely. I understand that fear. I have children of my own. When you love someone and you've spent decades building something to protect them, the idea of a variable you can't account for is genuinely frightening. She held his gaze. But your son is not 19 years old. He is a grown man who has run your organization with remarkable competence for 15 years and has earned the right to make his own choices about his own life. A pause. I think you know that. I think the fear is talking louder than the knowing right now. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Byung-soo looked at her with those still sharp eyes for what felt like a very long time. Then he said, with a precision that gave nothing away, "You are a remarkable woman, Ms. Hayes." "Thank you," she said. "I have not changed my position," he said. I didn't expect you to, she said. Not today. Something moved across his face that might, in different lighting, have been the very beginning of respect. My son chose well, he said, in the quality of the problem he has brought me. Lorraine almost smiled. I'll take that, she said. She drove home through the San Marino afternoon with her heart beating steadily and her hands relaxed on the wheel, and she called no one and said nothing to anyone, and when Junho called at 6 she told him it had gone as expected and that she was fine, and he asked 3 times in different ways if she was sure and she said yes each time with the same patient certainty, and eventually he believed her. What Lorraine did not tell Junho was that as she had been leaving, Byung-soo had stopped her in the hallway. Ms. Hayes, he had said. She had turned. He had looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully categorize. My son has not smiled in a very long time, he said. Not in the way I understand smiling. Not in the way his mother used to make him smile before she passed. A pause so brief she almost missed it. I noticed, when I arrived, that something had changed in him. Lorraine had held his gaze and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. I have not changed my position, he repeated. But I am not a man who cannot see what is in front of him. He had looked away then, toward the window, in a way that felt like the closest he would come to a concession. Take care of him, he said quietly. He works very hard at being unmoved by things. It costs him more than he shows. I know, Lorraine had said softly. She had walked out into the afternoon and sat in her car for a moment and thought about fathers who loved their sons in complicated and imperfect ways and still loved them completely, and she had felt something shift in her understanding of the whole situation that made it both more complicated and more human than it had been before. December arrived, and with it the particular festive energy of Los Angeles that always struck Lorraine as slightly surreal. Christmas lights strung on palm trees, Santa Anas blowing warm and dry through streets decorated for winter, the sun still present and unhurried in the December sky. She had always loved it. It was her city's most endearing contradiction. She and Junho had developed a rhythm that felt, increasingly, like something with permanence in it. He stayed at her house 3 nights a week. He learned where she kept things and stopped asking before he used them, which was a form of intimacy she had not anticipated and found more moving than she might have expected. He made Korean breakfast on Sunday mornings, soft rice porridge with pickled vegetables and a fried egg, and she sat at her counter and watched him move through her kitchen with the focused ease of a man who cooked seriously, and she thought about Gerald who had burned water and always said so proudly, and she thought that love came in different shapes and all of them were valid. He met Camille on a video call in early December, which had not been planned but happened because Camille called while he was there and Lorraine had decided, in the particular way she made decisions, that there was no point in awkward avoidance. She handed him the phone with a warning expression that made him raise an eyebrow, and spent the next 45 minutes listening to her eldest daughter conduct what was essentially a thorough and cheerful interrogation that would have intimidated most men and seemed to genuinely amuse Junho. When Camille finally hung up, having extracted approximately everything there was to know about him, Junho looked at Lorraine with an expression of mild wonder. Your daughter is terrifying, he said. She's a corporate attorney, Lorraine said. That's her resting mode. Does she approve? He asked, and the fact that the question was not entirely casual told her something that made her quietly glad. She texted me while you were talking, Lorraine said, picking up her phone and reading. Mama, he looked at you 3 times while answering my questions. 3 times, like you were the answer. I approve. Do not mess this up. Junho was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a full genuine laugh she had only heard a handful of times, warm and unguarded, and she stored it away carefully because those laughs were rare and she valued them disproportionately. I like her, he said. You'd better, Lorraine said. She's the easiest one. It was Hyun-soo who brought the first serious complication, on a Wednesday evening when he called Junho during dinner at Lorraine's house. She watched Junho's face change as he listened, not dramatically, a professional neutrality dropping into place like a shield, and he excused himself and took the call in the hallway. He came back 5 minutes later and sat down and picked up his fork, and she looked at him and waited. "Young SEO is in Los Angeles," he said. Lorraine set down her own fork with perfect composure. "For what purpose?" "Officially, business," he said. "Her family has interests here. But Hyunsu's information suggests she knows about you and came partly for that reason." "She wants you back," Lorraine said. "Not a question. She wants leverage," he said. "Which is different, and more characteristic of her." He looked at Lorraine directly. "I want you to know about this before you encounter it rather than after." "I appreciate that," she said. "What does she look like?" He blinked slightly, which was as close to thrown off as she had seen him. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to encounter this woman I want to recognize her," Lorraine said practically. "I'm not asking to feel threatened. I'm asking to be prepared." He looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant he was recalibrating something. "She is tall," he said. "Late 40s. She dresses expensively. Dark hair, usually worn down." "Thank you," Lorraine said, and picked her fork back up. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly, watching her. "I'm practical," she said. "There's a difference." She pointed at his plate with her fork. "Eat your food before it gets cold." He ate his food. But his eyes stayed on her throughout the rest of the meal with a warmth and a steadiness that said, more clearly than most things, that SEO young SEO or no SEO young SEO, his mind was entirely made up. She met young SEO 4 days later. It was a Saturday afternoon and Lorraine was coming out of the Korean beauty supply store on Western Avenue. She had recently developed a deep appreciation for certain Korean skincare products and was not ashamed of it, when a woman fell into step beside her on the sidewalk with the deliberateness of someone who had been waiting. She was exactly as Junho had described. Tall, dark-haired, impeccably dressed in a camel coat that cost more than Lorraine's monthly mortgage payment had in its final year. She was beautiful in the particular way of a woman who had always known it and organized her confidence around it. She looked at Lorraine with dark appraising eyes and a smile that was perfectly constructed. "Ms. Hayes," she said, in lightly accented English. "I'm SEO young SEO. I believe you know who I am." "I do," Lorraine said, and stopped walking with the unhurried composure of a woman who had nowhere she needed to be faster than this. "I thought we might talk," young SEO said. "We can talk," Lorraine said agreeably. "What would you like to say?" Young SEO looked at her for a moment, something flickering in her eyes, and Lorraine understood that she had expected a different opening, nervousness, perhaps, or defensiveness, or the particular shrinking that some women did when confronted with someone who represented a prior claim. She offered none of these things, simply stood on the sidewalk in her good navy blazer with her skincare purchases under her arm and waited with absolute patience. "Junho and I have a long history," young SEO said. "I'm aware," Lorraine said. "He will always come back to that history," young SEO said. "Whatever he tells himself now. Whatever he tells you. Our families are connected. Our worlds are the same. What you and he have is," she paused, choosing her word with visible deliberateness, "a novelty." Lorraine looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, in the same pleasant unhurried tone she had used throughout, "Young SEO, I'm going to say something that I mean with complete sincerity and no hostility." She held the woman's gaze evenly. "I am 61 years old. I have outlasted and outworked and outlived a great many things that people told me I wouldn't survive. I buried a man I loved with my whole heart and I rebuilt my life with my own 2 hands." She tilted her head slightly. "I don't compete. I don't negotiate for a man's attention. And I don't experience novelty, I experience my life, which I have been living with full commitment since before you were born. A pause. If Junho chooses to return to you, that will be his choice and I will respect it. But it will be his choice, made freely. Not something arranged around me. Young Iseo stared at her. Lorraine smiled, genuinely and without malice. It was nice to meet you, she said, and walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat and breathed for exactly 30 seconds. Then she started the engine and drove home through the Los Angeles afternoon, and she did not call Junho immediately because she needed to process first, and she made herself a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table and thought about what it meant to know yourself so thoroughly that other people's attempts to destabilize you simply found no purchase. Gerald, she thought, would have applauded. Asterisk friends, if this story has you on the edge of your seat, please subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Tales right now. We are so incredibly close to our monetization goal and every single subscription is a gift to us. It costs you nothing and means everything. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love our community so much. Junho found out about the encounter with young Seo the same evening. Not from Lorraine, who had decided to tell him in her own time and in her own way. From Hyun-soo, who had surveillance on young Seo as a standard precaution and had seen the interaction on Western Avenue and called Junho within the hour. Junho arrived at Lorraine's house at 7 with the controlled tension of a man who was angry in the deep quiet way that was more serious than noise. She opened the door and read his face immediately and stepped back to let him in without comment. He stood in her hallway and looked at her with eyes that were doing several things at once. You should have called me, he said. I was going to tell you tonight, she said. Come in and sit down. Lorraine. Junho. Her voice was firm and gentle in equal measure. Come and sit down. He came and sat down. She made tea because it gave her hands something to do and gave him a moment to settle, and she set the cups on the table and sat across from him and told him exactly what had happened, without drama and without omission. He listened with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set, and when she finished he was quiet for a long moment. She had no right to approach you, he said. She has the right to say whatever she chooses, Lorraine said. I have the right to respond however I choose. I handled it. I know you handled it, he said, and something in his voice made it clear that this was part of what was affecting him. That is not the point. Then what is the point, she asked. He looked at her. The point is that you are having to navigate my complications, he said. My father. My past. My world pressing into your life without your invitation. And you handle it all with this. He made a gesture that encompassed her composure, her stillness, the teacups, the whole quality of her, this grace, as though it cost you nothing. And I know it costs you something. I know it must. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, looking at him. He was right, and she appreciated that he saw it. It did cost her something. Not in the way of doubt about him or about what they were building, but in the way that any sustained composure cost energy, and she was human, and there were moments when she was tired. It costs me something, she confirmed. But so does everything worth having. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. I am not fragile, Junho. I need you to stop treating this like I might break. I'm not concerned about you breaking, he said quietly. I'm concerned about being the reason you have to be strong in the first place. She looked at him for a long moment, at the genuine worry in his face, the weight of it, and she felt something move through her that was tender and fierce in equal measure. Listen to me, she said. I chose this. Every morning I choose it again, with full knowledge of what it comes with. I am not a woman who stumbles into things and then complains about where she's standing. She squeezed his hand. Stop apologizing for your life. I knew what your life was before I sat down to dinner with you. I made my decision with my eyes open. He turned his hand over and held hers, and looked at her with an expression so unguarded that she felt the privilege of it, the specific trust of a man who did not show this face to the world, allowing her to see it fully. What did you say to her? He asked. Young SEO. Lorraine told him, in the same plain terms she had used throughout. When she finished, he was looking at her with something in his eyes that was beyond what she had words for, something that went past admiration or appreciation into a territory that was quieter and more permanent. She called you a novelty, he said. She did, Lorraine confirmed. He shook his head slowly. She has never understood the difference between what is familiar and what is valuable, he said. She spent 7 years trying to fit me into a shape I was never going to become and called it love. He looked at Lorraine steadily. You have never once tried to fit me into anything. You're not a shape I'm trying to create, Lorraine said. You're a person I'm trying to know. He was very still for a moment. Then he stood and came around the table, and she stood too, and he held her face in both hands with that deliberate gentleness and kissed her in a way that said things neither of them had yet put into words, and she held the front of his jacket and kissed him back with the full unhurried warmth of a woman who had decided and was not looking back. When they separated, he kept his forehead against hers, and she could feel the tension leaving his body by degrees, the carefully managed weight of his day unwinding in the warmth of her kitchen. Stay, she said quietly. Yes, he said, without hesitation. Young SEO did not give up easily. This, Lorraine supposed, was consistent with being a woman who had held on to something for 6 years and come across an ocean for it. She made 2 more approaches in the week that followed, both of them calculated and both of them unsuccessful. The first was a public one. She appeared at a restaurant where Lorraine and Junho were having dinner with Hyun-soo and made a scene that was elegant enough to be deniable as a scene while being unmistakably one, greeting Junho with proprietary warmth and regarding Lorraine with the kind of microscopic condescension that was designed to make the recipient feel it without being able to name it. Lorraine felt it. She named it to herself, filed it accurately, and smiled throughout with the serene composure of a woman who had been professionally courteous to difficult people for 22 years and could do it in her sleep. Junho was coldly civil to young SEO and ended the interaction in under 4 minutes with a precision that made Hyun-soo, watching from across the table, look briefly impressed. In the car afterward, Lorraine said nothing about it and Junho said nothing about it for 3 blocks and then said, without looking away from the road, you were extraordinary in there. I was polite, Lorraine said. The politeness was extraordinary, he said. She looked out the window at the Los Angeles night and permitted herself a small private smile. The second approach was less elegant. Young SEO came to Pacific Meridian Bank on a Thursday morning, to Lorraine's bank, her professional space, the place she had built over 22 years, and asked to see her under the pretense of opening a business account. Sandra, who had never forgiven the world for not telling her more about Junho and compensated by being fiercely protective of Lorraine, came to Lorraine's office with an expression of deep suspicion and relayed the request. Lorraine put down her pen. Send her in, she said. Young SEO came in dressed for impact, which Lorraine noted and set aside, and sat across the desk with the posture of a woman accustomed to being the most significant presence in a room. Lorraine clasped her hands on the desk and waited. You're not going to make this easy, young SEO said, dropping the pretense of the account inquiry immediately. There's nothing to make easy or difficult, Lorraine said. Junho is not a decision I'm revisiting. He will hurt you, young SEO said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that was not strategy, something raw underneath the composed surface. Not because he wants to. Because his world does not accommodate the people he loves. I know this better than anyone. I spent 7 years learning it. Lorraine looked at her with the full attention she gave to things that deserved it, and what she saw surprised her slightly, not a villain, not a predator, but a woman who had genuinely loved someone and genuinely lost him and had not yet found a way to put it down. Young Seo, she said, with a gentleness she meant. I hear what you're saying. And I believe you experienced what you're describing. She paused. But I think the story you're telling about why it ended may not be entirely accurate. Young Seo's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? I mean that a man's world not accommodating the people he loves and a man choosing not to accommodate a specific person are two different things, Lorraine said carefully. I don't know everything that happened between you. But I know Junho, and I know that when he decides something matters to him he reorganizes everything around that decision. She held the woman's gaze. I think you may have been the wrong person at the wrong time, and that is genuinely painful and genuinely not your fault, but it is not the same as what you're telling me. Young Seo stared at her for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was complicated and unresolved. Then she stood, with the careful composure of a woman reassembling herself, and smoothed her coat. You are not what I expected, she said. I've been hearing that a lot lately, Lorraine said. Young Seo looked at her for one final moment at the door. Take care of him, she said, and it came out with a genuine weight that had nothing manipulative in it, just the honest residue of a long feeling. He carries more than he shows. I know, Lorraine said. Young Seo left. Sandra appeared in the doorway approximately 6 seconds later with both eyebrows elevated at maximum height. Lorraine gave her a look. Sandra retreated. Lorraine picked up her pen and went back to work. Christmas came to Lorraine's house with more warmth than it had carried in 4 years. Camille flew in from Atlanta with her husband and their 2 children. Derek came from Seattle, quieter than his sisters and more observant, with the careful eyes of the family's middle child who had spent a lifetime reading rooms. Simone called from London on Christmas Eve and made everyone laugh for 40 minutes on video call with stories about her British co-worker's relationship with the concept of adequate central heating. Junho came on Christmas evening, after Lorraine's family had had their private mourning, arriving with a Korean pear and persimmon gift set that he presented to Lorraine with a formality that made Camille exchange a look with her husband across the room. He sat in Lorraine's living room among her children and her grandchildren and her Christmas decorations and the particular controlled chaos of a family that was comfortable with each other, and he was quiet and attentive and completely present in the way she had learned to value. Derek assessed him for the first hour with the focused neutrality of a protective son who was reserving judgment. Then Junho, apparently having decided that the assessment deserved a direct response, turned to Derek during a lull in the general conversation and said, You have questions. Ask them. Derek blinked. Then, to his credit, he asked them. For 20 minutes the 2 men talked in the corner of the living room while Lorraine, watching from the kitchen doorway, pretended to be doing something with the dessert plates. Camille appeared at her elbow. What are they talking about? She whispered. I don't know, Lorraine murmured. Derek is nodding, Camille observed. He never nods. He did not nod at Marcus and they dated for 2 years. Camille, Lorraine said. I'm just noting it factually, Camille said, and stole a Christmas cookie from the plate. Later, when the children were tired and the dishes were done and the house had settled into the warm aftermath of a full day, Junho sat beside Lorraine on her porch in the cool December night while inside her family moved through the last rituals of the evening. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional distant sound of Christmas music from a neighbor's window, the Los Angeles sky holding its usual ambient glow. Your family is remarkable, he said. They're a lot, she said. I mean it genuinely, he said. The ease between you. The way they talk to each other. The way they talk to you. He paused. My family is not like that. No, she said gently. My father and I speak in strategy, he said. My sister and I speak in obligation. It is, he considered the word, efficient. But it is not what you have in there. Lorraine looked at his profile in the dark. It can change, she said quietly. Families are not fixed things. They are made and remade constantly by the people in them. He turned and looked at her. The porch light caught the planes of his face and the steadiness in his eyes, and she thought again, as she had thought many times, that he was a man carrying a great deal of solitude that he had convinced himself was simply the cost of his position. I want to tell you something, he said. Tell me, she said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone choosing words with care, not because he was uncertain of the feeling but because he wanted the words to be worthy of it. I have been alone for a very long time, he said. Not physically. I am surrounded by people constantly. But alone in the way that matters. He turned to face her fully on the porch. You ended that. Without trying, without strategy, without asking anything in return. You simply, he paused, showed up. In that alley and every day after it. And I find that everything I was willing to accept as simply the condition of my life is no longer acceptable to me because I now know what it feels like when it is different. Lorraine held his gaze for a long moment. She felt the full weight of what he was saying and she did not diminish it or redirect it or respond to it with anything other than what it deserved. Junho, she said quietly. I love you. The words came out with the same plainness she brought to everything, no drama, no performance, just the clean honest statement of something that had been true for a while and was ready to be said. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, completely open, every layer of the careful controlled composure he wore like a second skin gone, just him, just the man underneath all of it, and she thought that this was perhaps the most significant thing she had ever been trusted with. I love you, he said, and his voice was quiet and absolute. I have not said that to anyone in my adult life and meant it the way I mean it now. She reached up and touched his face and he turned into her hand like a man who had been cold for a very long time and had finally found warmth, and she felt something complete in her chest that she had not felt in 4 years, not replacement, never replacement, but continuation. The story of her heart moving forward the way Gerald would have wanted it to, full and present and entirely alive. Inside the house she could hear Camille laughing at something Derek had said and the particular sound of her grandchildren refusing to go to sleep, and the Christmas lights on her porch cast everything in warm gold, and Lorraine Hayes sat in her own life on Christmas night with a man she had not planned for and could not imagine being without. And she thought that 61 was a remarkable age to discover that love did not diminish with repetition. It deepened. Friends, we are so close to our goal. If this story has touched your heart tonight, please subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Tales. Every single subscription brings us closer to monetization and closer to bringing you more stories like this one. We are building something beautiful together and we cannot do it without you. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one and we are so grateful for every one of you. January arrived with the particular clean energy of a new year settling into itself, and with it came the resolution of things that had been building through the months before. Byung-soo had extended his stay in Los Angeles longer than anyone had expected. He gave organizational reasons, which were real enough, but Junho understood, with the particular understanding of a son who had spent a lifetime reading his father, that the extension had other dimensions that were not being stated. Byung-soo was watching. Assessing. Processing something that did not fit within his existing framework and taking the time to build a new one. Junho did not push him. He had learned long ago that his father arrived at conclusions on his own timeline and that attempting to accelerate that timeline produced only resistance. He focused on his work, maintained his regular rhythms, and spent his evenings with Lorraine with a fullness and ease that had become, in the space of a few months, as necessary to him as sleep. It was Hyun-soo who told him, on a Thursday morning in the second week of January, that Byung-soo had asked for Lorraine's address. Junho set down his coffee very carefully. He asked for it directly? He asked my assistant, Hyunsu said. Casually. As though it were a small thing. Junho was quiet for a moment. Did he get it? My assistant came to me first, Hyunsu said, with the tone of a man whose staff had been trained well. Good, Junho said. He picked up his phone and called Lorraine. She picked up on the second ring, her professional voice, which meant she was at the bank. Good morning. My father is attempting to find your home address, he said, without preamble, because she had told him from the beginning that she preferred directness and he had taken her at her word. A brief pause. Attempting or has found? Attempting, he said. Hyunsu intercepted it. All right, she said, with the composure of a woman adjusting her expectations for the day. What do you think he intends? I don't know, Junho said. Which is what concerns me. I'm not concerned, she said. If he wants to see me, he can come to the bank. I'll be here until 6. Lorraine. Junho, she said, gently. Let me handle this if it comes. Trust me. He was quiet for a moment. Trusting people was not something he did easily or without reservation. It was perhaps the single most difficult requirement of loving her, and he was discovering that he was more capable of it than he had previously believed. Call me afterward, he said. Of course, she said. Go to work. Byung-suk came to the bank at 4 in the afternoon. He came alone, which surprised Sandra enough that she came to Lorraine's office with wide eyes and a whispered report that the elder Mr. Kong was in the lobby without any of his usual people. Lorraine nodded, straightened her blazer, and went out to meet him herself rather than sending Sandra back. He was standing by the window again, as his son had stood on his first visit, looking out at Wilshire Boulevard. He turned when he heard her and she was struck again by the quality of his stillness, so like Junho's and yet carrying a different weight, the weight of a man at the end of a long road rather than the middle of one. Mr. Kong, she said warmly. This is a surprise. Please come in. She led him to her office and closed the door and gestured to the chair across from her desk and sat down herself with the composed professionalism of a woman entirely at home in her space. He sat with the careful deliberateness of a man who had made a decision and was committed to it. I owe you an apology, he said. Lorraine held very still. Of all the things she had prepared herself for, this had not been among them. When we met in San Marino, he continued, in his precise careful English, I came with the intention of discouraging you. I used arguments about culture and appropriateness and position that were, on reflection, not entirely honest. What were they, on reflection? She asked. He looked at her with those sharp still eyes that had softened by some small but significant degree since San Marino. Fear, he said. I am an old man who built his life around control. My son is the most significant thing I have ever made, though I have not always told him so in ways he could hear. He paused. When I saw what you were to him, I did not think about whether you were good for him. I thought about what it would mean to my control of the situation. That was wrong. Lorraine was quiet for a moment, genuinely moved, though she kept it measured. Mr. Kong, she said. That kind of honesty is not a small thing. I want you to know I hear it. I have been watching, he said. Since I arrived. Not intrusively. But watching. My son, he paused, and something in his face shifted, the controlled surface admitting something from beneath it. My son is different. Not in his work, not in his competence. But in the way he carries himself when the work is finished. There is a ease in him that was not there before. He looked at her steadily. I have not seen that ease since his mother was alive. Lorraine felt the weight of that sentence settle over the room. She died when he was 26, Byung-suk continued. He closed something after that. I understood it because I did the same when she passed. I thought it was simply the Kong way. I think now that I was wrong about that also. Grief teaches us things about ourselves that aren't always accurate, Lorraine said gently. We learn survival and we mistake it for identity. He looked at her for a long moment. You are a wise woman, Miss Hayes. I've had good teachers, she said. Life mostly. Some of them difficult. Something moved across his face that was, unmistakably, the beginning of a genuine smile. It transformed him briefly into a glimpse of the man he might have been in easier circumstances, and she saw Junho in it so clearly that her breath caught for just a moment. I have not changed my position entirely, he said, with the honesty she was beginning to understand was actually one of his characteristics when he was not operating from fear. There are cultural distances that are real and I will not pretend otherwise. But I am a man who can be wrong and I am capable of saying so. He straightened slightly. My son has chosen you. He has chosen you in the way of a man who does not change his mind. I would rather be part of his life as it is than correct about something that is already decided. Lorraine looked at him for a long moment, at this complicated and imperfect man who had loved his son badly and well simultaneously for 50 years, and she felt the particular compassion she had for people who were trying, genuinely trying, to do better than they had done. Mr. Kong, she said. I would like very much for you to be part of his life. And of ours. She extended her hand across the desk. Shall we start again? He looked at her hand. Then he took it, with a firmness and a dignity that told her everything about who he was at his best. Yes, he said. I think we shall. She called Junho from the parking structure at 6:15. He picked up before the first ring had fully sounded, which told her he had been waiting with his phone in his hand. Tell me, he said. She told him. She heard the silence on the other end of the line expand and change quality as she spoke, becoming something that was not quite silence at all but something denser and more complicated. When she finished he did not speak for a moment. She waited. He apologized, he said finally. The words came out with a flatness that told her how much weight they carried. My father apologized. He did, she confirmed. Another silence. In 23 years of running this organization, Junho said, with a careful evenness that was doing a great deal of work, I have not once heard my father apologize to anyone. He loves you, Lorraine said simply. He just needed to love you better than he was. The silence this time was different, softer at the edges. She heard him exhale slowly. Come home, he said, and the word home landed between them with a weight and a warmth that neither of them addressed directly but both of them felt completely. I'm on my way, she said. Spring came to Los Angeles in its usual unhurried way, the jacaranda trees erupting in violet extravagance along the boulevards, the hills going green before the long summer dried them back to gold. Lorraine drove to work through streets she had driven for 30 years and found them newly vivid in a way she had not expected, the particular trick that happiness played on familiar things, making them look slightly more themselves. She and Junho had reached an arrangement that suited them both, which was the only kind of arrangement Lorraine had ever been interested in. He kept his apartment in Koreatown because she had told him frankly that moving in together was a conversation for a later chapter and she believed in sequencing things properly, but he was at her house often enough that Derek, on his second visit in March, had noted with the dry observation of a middle child, his toothbrush is in the bathroom, Mama, with an expression that was 3/4 amusement and 1/4 the permanent protective assessment of a son who would never entirely stop. I'm aware of my own bathroom, Derek, Lorraine had said serenely. Derek had looked at Junho, who had looked back at him with perfect composure, and then Derek had done the nod again, the one Camille had noted at Christmas, and said, all right then, and helped himself to more of Junho's Sunday morning rice porridge, which had by this point become a fixture of the Hayes family weekend vocabulary. Byung-soo returned to Seoul in February with a formal courtesy toward Lorraine that had none of the warmth she hoped might eventually develop but all of the respect she had asked for, which was enough for now. She was a patient woman. She understood that some things grew slowly and were worth waiting for. Young Seo left Los Angeles in January without further incident. Lorraine learned this from Hyun-soo, who mentioned it with the particular understated relief of a man who had been managing a complication and was glad to see it resolve. She felt no triumph about it. Only a quiet wish that the woman would find what she was looking for somewhere that wasn't organized around someone else's life. Junho's organization continued its operations with the discretion and efficiency that had always characterized it, and Lorraine continued her work at Pacific Meridian Bank with the same focused professionalism of 22 years, and the two worlds existed in the parallel way that she had determined from the beginning was the only workable arrangement. She did not ask questions she did not want the full answers to. He did not bring complications to her door. They had negotiated this without negotiating it, in the way of two people who understood each other well enough that certain things did not need to be said. What she had not fully anticipated was how much his presence would restore in her that she had not realized was diminished. She laughed more. She cooked elaborate Sunday meals because someone was there to eat them with full attention and genuine appreciation. She went to the Getty twice in 1 month and stood in front of paintings talking about them with someone who had opinions. She woke up on Saturday mornings to the smell of rice porridge and the sound of him on a call in the other room, his voice low and precise in Korean, and she lay in the warm bed in the morning light and felt the particular gratitude of a woman who had been given something she had stopped expecting. Gerald was still with her. He always would be. She had made her peace with the way love worked, how it did not replace but added, how the heart was not a fixed container but an expandable one, how loving again was not a betrayal of what had been but an honoring of it. Gerald had loved her so well for so long that she knew exactly what love felt like and could recognize it when it came to her again, even dressed in ways she had not anticipated. She thought about this on a Saturday afternoon in April, sitting on her porch with a cup of coffee, watching Junho in her small backyard. He had, over the past month, become quietly involved in her neglected garden with the focused determination he brought to everything, appearing on weekends with plants and quiet purpose, and the backyard was transforming slowly under his attention into something ordered and alive. He was kneeling by the raised bed he had built her, checking something in the soil with his bare hands, his expensive jacket folded over the porch rail because he had learned within 2 sessions that her garden did not care about expensive jackets. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows and he was entirely absorbed in what he was doing and he had not yet noticed her watching him. She watched him for a long moment with the full unhurried attention of a woman who understood the value of a moment worth keeping. He looked up and found her eyes across the yard and the expression on his face when he saw her there, watching him with her coffee cup and her quiet Saturday morning composure, was the expression of a man who could not believe his luck and was grateful for it every day. He held her gaze for a moment and then he smiled, the full real smile that she had been collecting since November, and it still did to her what it had done the first time she saw it. She raised her coffee cup slightly in a small toast. He shook his head slowly, the way he did when she did something that undid him, and went back to his garden. The evening Junho proposed was not elaborate. He had planned something elaborate. She would find out later from Hyun-soo, who told her with the slightly pained expression of a man who had spent considerable effort on logistics, that there had been a reservation at the 34th floor restaurant in Century City, the one from their first dinner, and a specific table, and something involving the Los Angeles skyline at a particular time of evening. But it did not happen that way, because life rarely delivered its significant moments on schedule. What happened was that they were in her kitchen on a Wednesday evening in late April, doing nothing more remarkable than the kind of nothing that had become their most comfortable language. He was reading something on his phone at the counter and she was sorting through the week's mail at the table, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like the soup she had made earlier and outside the evening was doing its Los Angeles thing with the light, going gold, and then amber, and then the specific shade of pink that appeared over the valley on clear spring evenings. Junho put his phone down. She looked up from the mail. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before, something that was resolved and quiet and entirely certain, and he said her name the way he always said it, as though it meant something. Lorraine. Yes, she said. He came around the counter and stood before her and took both her hands from the pile of mail and held them in his, and she felt her heart do something it had no business doing at 61 years old on a Wednesday evening over a pile of envelopes. I had a plan, he said. A restaurant and a view and a particular moment. Hyunsu was very invested in it. What happened to the plan? She asked. I looked at you just now, he said simply, and I couldn't wait. She held his gaze. I am not an easy man, he said, with the honest precision she had loved from the beginning. My world is complicated and I cannot promise it will uncomplicate. I am better at control than at surrender, and I am working on that every day because of you. He held her hands more firmly. But I know with complete certainty that the best thing in my life is you. Not the most convenient thing or the most strategic thing. The best thing. The thing that makes everything else make sense. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a ring that made her breath leave her body for a moment, simple, elegant, a deep blue sapphire flanked by small diamonds, the kind of ring that understood exactly who she was and what she valued. Marry me, he said. Not because it is practical. Not because it resolves anything. But because I love you and I am not interested in a version of my life that doesn't have you at the center of it. Lorraine looked at the ring and then at his face and then at the ring again, and then she did something that surprised them both. She laughed, a full warm unguarded laugh, the laugh that he had told her once was the first thing that had genuinely broken through the wall he kept around himself. What? He said, and he was almost smiling despite himself. I was just thinking, she said, that when I stayed late to finish that audit in October I had absolutely no idea what I was walking into. Is that a yes? He asked. She looked at him, this complicated and careful and genuinely good man who had shown up in her alley and her life and her kitchen and her backyard and had loved her with the full force of someone who had spent years saving it up, and she thought about Gerald who had loved her first and completely and had left her better than he found her, and she thought about her children who were already half in love with this man themselves, and she thought about 61 years of a life built on her own terms that had somehow, perfectly, made room for this. Junho, she said. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her finger with the careful deliberateness that was entirely his, and then he held her face in his hands the way he did and kissed her in her kitchen in the April evening light, and outside Los Angeles went about its enormous indifferent business, and inside everything was complete. They married in July. Not a large wedding. Lorraine had done the large wedding at 30 and it had been beautiful and right for that chapter. This was a different chapter and it asked for something different. 40 people in her backyard, the garden that Junho had built for her in full summer bloom, Camille crying before the ceremony even started, Derek maintaining composure for approximately 4 minutes before abandoning it entirely, Simone having flown in from London and commandeering the music selection with an authority that nobody successfully challenged. Hyunsu stood with Junho, formal and composed and visibly moved in the way of a man who had seen his person through 15 years of chosen solitude and was quietly glad to see it end. Byung-soo came from Seoul. He sat in the front row in a dark suit and watched his son marry a 61-year-old black American woman from Los Angeles in a backyard full of flowers and people who loved them, and his expression throughout was something that Lorraine, catching his eye once during the ceremony, could only describe as a man arriving somewhere after a very long journey. She squeezed Junho's hands at the altar and he squeezed back and looked at her with those dark steady eyes that had first found her in a dim alley and had not really looked away since. The officiant asked if she took this man. I do, she said, with the same plainness and completeness she brought to everything. Without reservation. The officiant asked if he took this woman. Junho looked at Lorraine for a moment before he answered, in the way of someone taking a photograph with their eyes, storing something they intended to keep. I do, he said. Every version of her. Every day. Camille made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a cheer. Several of Lorraine's church ladies, who had come because nothing on earth was going to keep them away, produced handkerchiefs simultaneously. Derek put his arm around his wife and looked at the sky for a moment in the particular way of a man who was not going to cry at his mother's wedding and was working hard on that commitment. Lorraine laughed, because of course she did, and Junho smiled his full real smile, and they were married in the July afternoon in the garden he had grown for her, in the city that had held her life for 30 years, in the middle of a story that neither of them had planned and both of them had chosen every single day until it became the only story either of them wanted to be in. Afterward, when the guests had gone and the backyard was quiet and the summer evening had cooled to something comfortable, they sat together on the porch with glasses of wine and the specific stillness of two people who had arrived somewhere and knew it. Los Angeles hummed in its endless way beyond the neighborhood. The garden was silver in the evening light. Lorraine's ring caught the last of the sunset and sent a small arc of blue across the porch boards. How do you feel? Junho asked. She considered the question with the full attention it deserved. Complete, she said. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her fingers, and they sat together in the good quiet of a life that had been built honestly, with open eyes and full hearts, by two people who had found each other in the least likely of places and had been brave enough to stay. The evening deepened around them. Neither of them moved. There was nowhere else to be. And that, dear friends, is the end of our story. If this journey moved you, if Lorraine and Junho found a place in your heart, please subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Tales right now. We are so incredibly close to our monetization goal, and every subscription is a step toward bringing you more stories like this one. We pour our hearts into every single video, and we cannot continue without your support. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. And please, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We want to hear from every single one of you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. We will see you in the next story.